Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. You have found us here at Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. It is Tuesday, it is 4 p.m., and we are so thrilled that you are here today to join us to talk with Tim Johnston about Distant Sons, and more about that in about 10 seconds. First, I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 going on 15 novels of suspense. My current book is The House Guest, which you see on the door behind me. My book coming out in February. Look at this. Look at that. I can try to
Oh, nice.
One wrong word,
Nice.
the power of words, it sounds like, and how one word can ruin your life. And that comes out in February. And we'll be talking about that someday. But today, I have the absolute joy of welcoming Tim Johnston, whose book, Distant Sons, came out October the 17th. And I have to tell you all, this is quite special, this book. It is astonishingly well written. I'm not sure I've read anything like this ever in my life. It is immersive and compelling and gorgeous. I guess you would call it literary suspense. And it's a good story. I mean, it is a good story about an unsolved at some point crime, but it is also, the writing is beyond description, although I will try to get into that when I talk to Tim today. Let me read you what Janelle Brown said about this novel. Oh, look at you. When I'm looking at this way, I'm looking at the comments. Here is Sherry is here today, and Katie is here, and Susie Baldwin, and Kim, and Brenda Gaskell, and Deborah Prust. Oh, look at you all here. Renee Hirskowitz says, Tim, you're a new author to me. Nice to meet you. Absolutely. I am so pleased to be able to introduce Tim to you all. I will confess that he was new to me too, and now he is on my must-read list. This is gorgeous. Janelle Brown says, let me read you this. It takes a minute. Distant Sons is a mystery about a serial killer. Yes, but it's also not that at all. It's a heartbreaking story about family, failure, and the fallout from violence. Tim Johnston has crafted a riveting novel that takes us into the struggling blue-collar America and locates the hope hidden inside devastating loss. And Janelle says it is a beautiful book, and I concur. It absolutely is indeed. Welcome, Tim, from Iowa, and thank you for letting me babble for a second.
Oh, that was great. You can babble all you like.
How do you take in, and let's not even talk about the story for a minute, but and we will, I promise, but how people are connecting with your writing skill. How does that feel?
Generally pretty darn good. We were talking early before the show started about UMass Amherst, and I went there with an idea of being a literary writer. Since then, I've sort of had to adjust my idea of, my genre identification, pronouns. But that was kind of the training. And I also grew up in the University of Iowa. I went to my undergraduate here. So that was a very sort of literary, I had an old professor who used to say it with some tongue-in-cheek, literary sort of training ground. And then I went to UMass and Amherst, and I never, in those days, I think it's become, I think genre is getting taught a lot more in writing programs in general. But in those days, it was not taught and not talked about. And I didn't get out of there planning to do it. I got out of there with my 2 degrees and became a carpenter. And my idea was to continue writing literary fiction. But somewhere along the lines, about 2 novels ago, 3 novels, if you count this one, I wrote a book called Descent that, to my great surprise, was received and sort of, marketed and received as a kind of thriller, page turner kind of book. And so I've had to adjust to that. But the point is, it's always great to hear praise for the writing itself, because that's really what I was trained in and what I set out to do.
Well, you have a very special, if I can say this, I mean, it's just me, but Michael Carita loves your book. Look at the names on this. Janelle Brown, Michael Carita, Ellen Eskins, and Ivy Fachoda are just waxing poetic. about your writing? I mean, we all love the story, but there's something really quite special about this. Do you think that it can be learned?
Literary writing, like writing at your certain, I guess I learned it. I mean, I don't think I went to school with it intact. I think it was a lot of, because I was reading that kind of writing. I was, as I mentioned earlier, at the time, the UMass Amherst MFA program was half literature, half writing. So I was pretty deeply immersed in, classic canonical literary writing. And I was reading a lot of that. The short stories I was reading tended to be very literary, and the novels I read tended to be literary. However, back in the day when I was younger, give me Stephen King, give me the scary, frightening terror stuff. So I think once I got out of school and had certain requirements, I was free to let some of that old thriller excitement into the storytelling. But I think it can be learned if you're immersing yourself in that kind of writing, which I think is the ideal for anybody who wants to write. They should be reading. And if you want to write in a certain level or whatever, you should be reading that stuff. A lot of it.
Stephen King is the master storyteller. I mean, there's no more storyteller than that. And certainly his writing is exceptional and does not let go of you, whether it's the horror books or whether it's the not so horror, but the certainly psychological fiction, which is equally terrifying. Who did you love? Who did you fall in love with in college in books, not in people?
Yeah. Well, I remember reading a lot of Alice Munro. Flannery O'Connor was a huge early influence. Just the gothic wackiness of some of her stories, like a good man is hard to find, is a terrifying story. But I mean, it doesn't get much more literary than that. Joyce Carol Oates, who go ahead.
No, I'm just seeing this. I'm seeing this similarity in that the way you write, and then we'll get to the administrative stuff in a minute, you all, I promise. But the way you write is so open. I mean, it's just, you're not following any rules except your own writing heart. And it comes out that way, like fearlessly, authentically you. And it's absolutely captivating. Is that how it feels to you?
Captivating?
Fearless.
It feels unconstrained, because it is. I don't write with a formula in mind. I don't plot. I don't have a what do you call it?
Outline.
Sorry?
An outline?
Outline. That's the word I'm looking for. Yes, I don't have an outline, and I'm essentially. I think this is where some of that literary or unconstrained feeling comes from, is that every moment is important to me, and it's not the most exciting moment. It's just the moment I'm in, and I give it, my full attention. I think that every scene, every sentence, every exchange is extremely valuable and worth paying very, very close attention to. And in the end, I may end up having to cut those scenes that I worked very, very hard on, because they're just not really serving the story that well. But that's my method. I'm just going to take every scene that I'm in and write it as well as I can, and take as long as I want to doing it. And I have the luxury of doing that because I try not to be under, any kind of contract or deadline if I can help it. And so that's how that stuff gets written. And it makes for a much longer, and sometimes a kind of a less direct kind of plot line.
it's like life, though. It's an experience to read this novel. And as I said earlier, it's just immersive. And the reader should just let themselves be enveloped by the story. We'll get back to the story in a second. Let me welcome you all again to Crime Time. It is 4 p.m. on Tuesday. We are here on A Mighty Blaze on Crime Time. If you don't know about A Mighty Blaze, it was started at the beginning of the pandemic, now into the 4th year ago, by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, to keep us talking about books and learning about new books and discovering new authors and maybe making some new favorite authors. And that is why we continue here today. Let me introduce you formally now to Tim Johnston. Tim Johnston is the author of the novels Descent and The Current. We'll talk about both of those in a minute. The story collection Irish Girl and the young adult novel Never So Green. He holds degrees from the University of Iowa, where he lives now, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where my grandson is now. He's the recipient of the 2015 Iowa Author Award and currently lives in Iowa City, Iowa. And I'm fascinated by what you said about being a carpenter. A carpenter like a... Thank you, Brenda. Is asking about bookcases. And this is so random, but...
I built that bookcase, Brenda.
Awesome. It's a Tim.
I really did.
Do a carpenter like building a house or like building an armoire?
Yeah, it tends to be more along the lines of houses and remodels and things like that. I've built some carpentry. I mean, I've done some furniture work. Actually, the probably can't see it, but the table that the bookshelf is, I built that too. So I can do that stuff, but mainly when I was making a living, it was as a carpenter, it was houses and remodels and whatever needed doing.
Were you thinking about writing in that time? Shall we just do the metaphor about structuring a novel and from the structure and the outside and the painstaking way that it has to be done, or are they totally two separate things to you?
Well, the structuring part is two separate things. Because I don't structure, I don't tend to have a big structure in mind. But the comparison that I make is the patience and the attention to detail that goes into doing good carpentry well. And there was years when I was just working for my father, who was self-taught and didn't really want to spend a lot of time on any given project. Once I got away from that and started working for a really high-end contractor who did very high quality work in Los Angeles area, then I really blossomed as a carpenter, and that taking your time and attention to detail became very valuable. And I feel like it's the same thing with writing. It's like I try not, if you're going into a house that needs a lot of work and you think about the big picture, it can get kind of overwhelming. But if you say, oh, well, I'm going to start today by rehanging that door, which doesn't close right, and I'll just do that, and I'll spend as long as I need to make it close perfectly. So it feels good to open and close it. It's the same thing with writing. It's like, I'm not going to think about, 500, whatever, how many pages I'm going to end up writing. Today I'm going to work on this paragraph or even the sentence. And if that gets done, then that's great. That's a good day.
You're just making me cry, just sort of like you did in Distant Sons. And did I say that to enter to win a copy of Distant Sons, just leave a question or comment in the chat, and we will spin the wheel of fun at the end of the show, and somebody will win a copy of this terrific book, some very, very lucky person. So we'll talk a bit about what the book is really about in a minute, but can you just give us a hint of the plot of it? How do you describe it?
Well, I have a 10-second pitch.
All right, we'll take 10 seconds. We'll take 40 seconds.
40 seconds is harder. I'll probably get bogged down, but essentially it's two young carpenter men who are sort of on the road for their own reasons, kind of escaping their own pasts. Each of those paths are detailed in the previous two novels, but you don't have to read those novels to jump into this one, or they're not a series. I want to be clear about that. But anyway, these two young men meet by chance in a small town where 40 years ago, in 3 consecutive summers, 3 young boys went missing, 1 boy per summer. And then it just stopped. And it's now 40 years later, and they meet in this town, and they go to work for this old cranky guy out in the woods, who back in the day, there were stories, there were sort of rumors that he or his family, who were kind of outliers, might have had something to do with the missing boys. And so that's it's sort of a haunted town. This has become their sort of defining story, almost their curse. And the people who are in the current moment have connections. Like there's a detective whose father was a deputy at the time 40 years ago, and he's no longer a deputy, but she becomes interested in one of these 2 young men for different reasons altogether, for legal reasons or police procedure reasons. And so those two stories kind of intersect: the story of the 2 young men who meet in this town randomly, and that old unsolved serial murder or disappearance case from 40 years ago.
Let's just take each part of that for a second. You alluded earlier to the main characters of other novels coming together in this novel. That's a unique idea. Talk a little bit about where that came from.
Well, it came from a couple of places, and I didn't get around to talking about all my literary influences, but one of them is Cormac McCarthy, who I began reading in earnest when I was living up in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, working on a house up there. And he has a trilogy, the Border Trilogy, which includes All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities of the Plains. And it was always interesting to me that the first 2 books, All the Pretty Horses and The Crossing, are about 2 young men who have these sort of harrowing adventures as they cross into Mexico and back and forth from Texas. There's no connection. The 2 have no connection in those books. But in the 3rd book, you find them both working on a ranch, and they're friends. They've become friends. And there's no discussion of how they became friends, only other than that they both come from the same sort of area in Texas, and they clearly just end up working on this ranch together. But then they have a completely unrelated, there are themes that carry throughout the trilogy, but they have an unrelated adventure of their own. And I just was always taken by that idea that there's nothing but chance that connects the 2. And you don't have to read the previous 2 books to read the 3rd one, although there are themes that resonate and stories that resonate within it. So that's kind of like, I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, but it also, I was also compelled by the idea that both of these characters in my book were kind of unsettled at the end of their respective books. At the end of, literally at the end of the current, one of the characters was just missing. There was no resolution to what really became of him. And at the end of the other story, the young man is kind of heading back to Madison, Wisconsin with his family. And there's a line that says he was following them in a separate vehicle, and he was following them for now. Those 2 words really stuck with me. Like, he's not actually going to end up going back and resuming his life in Madison with his family. And that's where we find him, these 8 years later or something. He's driving around making a living as a carpenter. And the fact that his family is in Madison is why he's headed sort of back in that general direction, just to sort of stop in and see his father or something. And when we last saw the character from the previous book, his truck was found sort of pointing from Minnesota across the Mississippi toward Wisconsin. And it was just his truck that was found. So it kind of puts them both in the same area. And I hadn't intended that. But when I made that realization, I thought, well, it's conceivable that they could meet in the same small town just on the other side of the Mississippi in Wisconsin.
Do you hear how cool that is, you all? Because the power of the two characters in the previous two books, and then the characterization must have felt so strong to you, Tim. And then in the end of each book, they're both headed for a third book, and you didn't even know it, that was their destination.
Right.
What did you think that at that moment where you thought, that could work, and you had set it up?
Yeah. Well, that's typical. That's typical of me, that I don't necessarily see where things are going. And then it's I have a kind of aha moment, within each book. Or I have a challenge, like how is this going to all work out? I have no idea, but I'm just going to keep writing until I figure it out. And that sometimes, I think that lends to a greater sense of surprise in the reader when I feel surprised. But the aha moment was more of it was more like, really? Is that an idea? I don't know. Because I have this, maybe I heard it at UMass Amherst when I was in writing school, but somewhere along the line, someone said, or I read somewhere, that if you have a great idea for a story, don't jot it down. Don't start writing it. Do your best to forget it. And if you can't forget it, then start writing. So I wasn't.
Who said
sure.
that? Do you know who said that?
No, who do you?
Yeah, Stephen King.
Really? Is that right?
That's who I read having said that, because
that's great.
He said, I never write stuff down because I'll remember. It's not important. If it goes away, it's not important.
Right. Yeah, I never forgot that. That's great. I'm so glad to have that mystery solved.
Well, that's what I heard. So
yeah. Well, maybe we'll have to get absolute confirmation on that. So, and I couldn't get the idea out of my head, and it felt like it was blocking any other ideas. So I essentially started writing not with a great sense of, oh, this is going to be killer, but more like, well, I better just do this and see where it goes, And so it's very gratifying now to have the response that it's getting, because frankly, I was kind of writing to get it done and get beyond it. Not that I didn't enjoy the work and get into it, but it was like, well, I don't know if anyone's going to like this, but at least I'll have it done, and I'll have those stories. Those two characters will finally sort of be resolved, and I can move on.
I mean, Vicki Gregory is saying the creative process is fascinating. So agree, and would that we understood it. But I think the question that you ask throughout the novel is, what if this happened? Or what if this hadn't happened? Or what if it happened this way? This what if question seems to propel this novel so powerfully.
Yeah. Well, that's life, anytime something crazy, good or bad, happens to you or any of us, the tendency is to wonder, well, how much of that is just sort of random chance, being in the right or wrong place at the right or wrong time? And this is how the novel 3 books ago, Descent, begins with a family going out to Colorado, and 2 of the kids are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And everything, and that's usually what happens to people when bad things happen to them. But in this book, it was kind of a defining theme that kind of took over as because those 2 guys, they just meet by chance, and that was really compelling to me. And their chance meeting has repercussions. It sets off a chain reaction of things that culminate in a lot of sort of trouble and violence and revelation, and but also that's kind of like, I think, well, if I'd never gone out to Colorado as a carpenter to work on that house, I never would have had the idea to write Descent. So a lot of this book is the end result of an act of chance, really.
As is almost, everything is. You have a wonderful quote from Shakespeare at the end, which is essentially about planning and about how our lives evolve, which is just so beautifully done. Tell us a little bit about Dan and Sean.
Okay, well, let's start with Sean, because he's the beginning character. He's from. Should I hold up the book? One of the books.
I'll hold up the book.
Okay, Well, this book actually.
Okay, you hold up Descent. Okay.
Okay, Descent is the book I wrote when I was being a carpenter. When I should have been doing my carpentry work in Colorado, I started writing this book. And he's the young son of a family of 4 who grew up to Colorado for a summer vacation from Madison, Wisconsin. And his sister is a hardcore runner, and she's going to be a scholarship runner in the fall at University of Wisconsin. Anyway, the 2 of them go up into the mountains in the morning, and only Sean comes back down. And there's some mystery and wonder as to what happened to his sister. And we find out eventually that she's been abducted. And he's 15 at the time. And although he grows up to be 18 within the course of the book, he is sort of frozen in that moment of trauma in which he really failed to protect his sister. Her feeling is she failed to protect him also, but that's another story. So by the time, I won't tell you how the novel wraps up, but by the time he leaves Colorado, he has changed immensely. He's somewhat estranged from his family and from people, and he's trying to find himself, and he's out on the road just by himself, driving around in a truck, finding jobs, and so, and that's basically what he's doing when we get to Distant Sons. So, and Danny Young, he is a character, one of the main characters in the current, which takes place in Minnesota, in an unnamed town in Minnesota. And when he's a young man of about 17 or 18, he is, for a little bit while, suspected of the sort of gruesome death of a young woman in a park, and because he happens to have been in the park at the same time. And so that even though there's no hard evidence that he's involved, it's a small town, and the small town, and because no one else is ever within the confines of the story, no one else is necessarily
Caught
seriously, has the crime seriously pinned on them. He becomes ostracized from his town folk also, and from his people. And so he spends a lot of the time after he's 18, within that book, he's traveling around as it happens, and he's driving around and making a living at however he can. And then at the end of the novel, he's come back to town, and someone has taken a shot, like a rifle shot, at his truck, put a bullet hole in it. And so he gets the message that he should probably leave town again. But at the end of the novel, he is missing, and only his truck with the bullet hole is found. And that was a pretty big loose end.
Well, just
end of
because I don't want us to lose all the time. That to run out of time. But your book is so much, this book, Distant Sons. And again, as Margaret in the back room is saying, ask a question or leave a comment for a chance to win. Do not miss this book. You will want it. So do leave a question or a comment. It's so much about how the dominoes of the past topple over and hit the present and make what happens in the present be what it is. What is the power of that, both in the past, in Distant Sons, and for each of the men? Talk a little bit about the power of the past and what's that like to write.
Yeah, I think that everybody's got a story to tell, and I think when we get into these sort of high stakes stories, like you write and I write, they tend to be stories with something sort of traumatic, something bad has happened to somebody, and it's hard to outrun that. And you can't outrun it. So ultimately, they are running away, but they run right into it in another way. And this happens to Sean over and over again. He keeps having these encounters in which he feels like he needs to act in a way that he didn't act before, and it ends up getting him in more trouble.
I mean, it's just the Crookus Reviews said about this novel, and I have two parts of this. One is, it says, a slow burn novel that quietly elevates the fragile codes of honorable men. So slow burn, I don't know what that means. I think it means superly suspenseful, because the ticking clock in this story, the ominous tone of this story is that at any second, something is just going to be awful. And you just can't, you have to, I'm just trying to slow down and not read fast so I don't miss any of the writing, but hurry and read as quickly as I can to find out what's going to happen. But what I love about that review that talked about to elevate the fragile codes of honorable men, that phrase is so powerful to me. Was it meaningful to you? And is that what you were going for?
It's always a bit of a surprise to have things explained to you that you felt intuitively, but you didn't have words for, and that was one of them. Because I do think there are honorable men, but they also make mistakes. They're human, and they have their codes, and they can be fragile. But it's not something I was just, again, they were already sort of established as people. I knew their characters. I kind of knew their souls,
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just trying to be true to that. And put, and circumstances, I put them in circumstances, or I hate to say I put them in circumstances. Circumstances were there, and they walked into them. And how they behaved shows what their character is.
Yes. The decisions they make reveal who they are, no question. But there's in the tone and the voice, the color of this novel is so, it's full of inevitability and just sort of the doom and hope, though still, that still maybe everything will be okay, but it probably won't. It's just such a touching book. And if you don't know what's going to happen, is that even more haunting to you?
Yes. It's more powerful, and it feels more real when I don't really know where I'm going. I'm not trying to get there. I might have, the first few steps in a staircase figured out. But after the first couple of steps, it could go one direction or another. And it's more interesting and more compelling for me as a writer, to take that approach. I feel like I'm, I don't know you very well, but the more we talk, the better I get to understand who you are. It's the same with these characters. Even though I knew them from the previous books, they're older now, and they're going to make decisions that are going to affect not just themselves, but other people. And it's most interesting if I don't have that all figured out.
Yeah. Sally Field, I heard an interview with Sally Field where she said that she didn't like to know the end of the plays or movies that she was in, because she found herself playing to the end.
Right.
If she knew what was going to happen, her acting would feel inevitable.
Right.
And that was really powerful to me. I don't know the ending of my books ever. I don't know.
Cool. Good.
And but I wonder, at points do you feel that do you try to, when you feel something happen, when you're channeling their lives, do you try to protect them ever? Do you think, oh no, I can't let that happen, or do you take the risk and do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a situation by situation. If we go back to Descent, the first of the three, I had a kind of ending in mind, but the more I wrote about one of the characters, the less I wanted that ending to happen. Conversely, I had a character I didn't know why he was in the book, really, and I reached a point when I reached the point that I didn't want the ending for the other character to happen that way. This other character, who I didn't know why was in the book, suddenly had a purpose. and became the catalyst for how the novel ended and resolved. And so that was a surprise to me. Now, had I known what he was doing there, as you say, I probably would have been telegraphing where that was going, and it wouldn't have been as big a surprise. And I think it's one of the big surprises in the novel, and it was for me too. It was like, oh, now I understand what he's doing there. Is it too much? Maybe it's too much. I don't know, but people didn't think it was too much. So.
No, that's the best. I think that's what we live for. I can talk for myself. That's what we live for as writers, is when you get this idea and you think, are you kidding me? That's what happened?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. And there are some moments like, and I'm sure you've had this experience where you're just writing a scene and, you want another character to come in so that your character has someone to talk to or whatever. And you think this other character is just a minor bit player, is just gonna, move on, and your main character will move on. But slowly this character, begins to have a real purpose and becomes almost essential to the story. That's exciting. That's fun.
Yeah. And you can't, talk about the writing process. You can't explain that until that happens. It just
no. And 80 people who plot like crazy have this experience where they realize, my plot isn't working anymore, or I don't like this plot and I'm going to change it. Yeah. So even, there's no right or wrong to plotting or not plotting, but I think the only thing is that you have to be available to let the story go in another direction.
Oh my golly, I love that. You have to be available to let the story go in another direction. That's fantastic. I have one more question, and then let's take questions from the audience, because we have some really, really good questions.
I know the scroll here is just crazy. I want to stop and answer them all.
Well, afterwards, go back and look at it when we're over, because this will be
okay. Cool.
And the comments will be there. Your dialogue, your bullety dialogue, is just so great. It is
dialogue.
It's like bullets.
Oh, bullety.
Bullety. I just made that up.
That's good adverb.
It's just so fast and so natural. Do you just read that at the speed of light?
I think that's a thing that you learn. That's you may have a good ear for it naturally, but to be able to convey it to paper, that is a process. It's taken years to be able to really transfer what I hear in my head to words and sentences. I do feel like I get better with each book with dialogue, I think. And then it's a lot of editing. It's other people reading and saying, maybe this is a little wordy, or maybe it doesn't sound quite like this character or whatever. And you hone it and you re-listen to it and change it. But yeah, I'm pleased with, and it's fun to write. I love writing description, don't get me wrong. And I can get lost in description, but there's nothing like just getting so deep in a conversation that 10 pages go by and you look and you go, oh, that's all dialogue. That's awesome. That was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And it's awesome to read as well. Just so much fun. Talking about Distant Suns by Tim Johnston, not to be missed. I know you all have a lot of questions. Let's take a couple of them now. Randy says, I love the comparison, spending enough time and paying attention to detail. Yes, with the carpentry and with writing the little parts of each book. I just bought the audiobook, he says, yay. Did you have input into the choice of the narrator?
Well, thank you for buying the audiobook. And it's funny you should ask this question, because for the first time, and this is the fourth book that's had an audiobook, I actually got to sort of listen to a few potential narrators. And I don't want to get too deep into the process, but the first three were not right for this book, for this voice. And so we started over and I listened to another three, and 2 out of 3 I liked, and 1 I liked in particular. And because he sounded, and it is a male who narrates this entire book, but it just sounded more natural and closer to the voice that I heard in my head. I don't know about you, but I generally have a hard time listening to audiobooks because they don't sound like the voice that I've been hearing in my head for however long it's taken me to write this book. This one sounded pretty close, particularly when he was reading passages that were from Sean's point of view. So the answer is, yeah, I had some input, and it was kind of cool. And there's a little video of him actually reading that Algonquin put out a while ago, just a brief, and it was kind of cool. He's got the headphones on and he's reading a passage of the book.
Is it on your website? Can people find that?
I'll have to put it on there. I'll have to put a link to it. But I think, yeah, I think if you, yeah, I'll have to find a way. I don't know. These things, they come and go so fast that.
Right. We'll just buy the audiobook, you all, and you'll get to hear the whole thing. Distance by Tim Johnston. Go ahead. Who else has another question, Margaret? Let's hear from someone else. What did you know about the characters or story before you start to write? Yeah, what do you know? Well, you knew from the first two books, their backstories.
Yeah, and I kind of knew how they would meet, and that was enough to get the story going. And originally, I was going to have them both in town. They were going to be in the same town, unbeknownst to each other, and they would both go through a chapter of sort of orienting themselves to this new place. In the end, I decided it was better to not give away that they were both in the same town, but to have Sean come into town and then meet this guy. He doesn't even know the reader doesn't even know who it is until many pages later. It's just this random guy who sits down at the diner next to him, and they're kind of like both dressed the same, and they have maybe similar backgrounds or whatever, men of the trades as Sean thinks of them. And after that event, Danny, who we don't know is Danny, just walks out, or actually Sean walks out. But when Sean is driving away from the diner, he sees Danny walking along the road. And for whatever reason, he just decides to stop and say, "Do you want to ride? Where are you going? You look cold," whatever, which is how Sean ended up in town, because his truck broke down and someone stopped and gave him a ride. So he thought, I'll return the favor and give this guy a ride. And that's, that was enough to sort of get me going.
And what if he hadn't? What if he hadn't?
Yeah. What if? And he thinks at the time, he'll think, no, there's a line that he says later. He says later he'll wonder why he stopped, or why he didn't just let the guy go.
Exactly. I see Shannon Hansen at about 4:21 has a great question. Was Distant Sons always the title? Oh, is that a pooch? Let's see who's here. Who is that?
This is Pippa.
Pippa, hi, sweetheart. Your dad has been on long enough, hasn't he?
Yeah, she's like, yeah, where's my dinner? No, it's too early for that. All right, go on.
I need attention now. Was Distant Sons always the title? Asked Shannon Hansen.
No. A good question also. My working title the entire time I was writing was With These Hands.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Carpenter title.
Yeah. But also the sort of what can be done with these, what bad things can be done with these hands. And
whose.
Yeah, right. At whose hands, exactly. By whose hands.
And Kim says, do you feel small town settings, oh, good question, Kim, give you the ability to delve into the characters more because the town is a character?
That is an excellent insight. Yes. I think I love town. I love, novels that happen in big cities, but I get lost. I get lost myself writing in anything that's not sort of manageable, that I can't imagine as a place. Oh. And I often don't have to imagine much. In the current, it's basically a river, and there's a town by the river. It's an upper Iowa river, and or lower Minnesota rather, and that's about all I have to know. There are some place settings, like Rochester is not far away. The Mississippi is not far away. The Iowa borders, you can sort of figure out what general area you're in. But the less I really know about a town, I feel like the less it hampers me or restricts me in some way.
Yeah, exactly. I think all you need to know, especially in this book where the setting unspools so gorgeously, and I can absolutely picture it. The movie in my mind began instantly as this book began, and I could not put it down. Thank you, Tim, so much for this. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. Melissa's saying the dialogue made this book read so quickly, and that's great. Katie says, I see this as a movie. Randy says, I read a book or ebook and listen at the same time.
Well, that's cool. I've never heard of that. That's pretty neat.
That's a whole nother show, I think. So let's see who one of you will be the lucky winner of Distant Sons by Tim Johnston, and we will spin the wheel of fun and see who will win this. Look how fancy this is, Tim.
Oh, wow.
Someday we'll get music. I know we will. I rely on it. And no, we can't win, Margaret.
Hey, confetti. That's pretty cool.
And music. But Mighty Blaze can't win. This is just Margaret in the back room wanting this book for her own. So we'll just spin. We'll spin again. And thank you for the music. That's great, Margaret. You're hilarious. And the winner is, she really wants it, Margaret. Let's try it one more time. What are the odds? Well, I guess 1 in 23 of having us come up. Let's see. Katie Crutchfield.
Wow, hey, look at that.
Katie, you lucky, lucky woman. And we will you'll get a note that says to email me, and I will email our executive producer, and she will email Tim's publisher, and Tim's publisher will send you the book. And that's how it works in publishing. But you will wind up with Distant Sons by Tim Johnston. The rest of you, you know what to do in about 30 seconds. Run, 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 and get this novel. It is absolutely fantastic and immersive and terrific. I have no more words. It is terrific. Tim, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It was wonderful. I really
I
enjoyed
it. Hi to Pippa, who is not letting you go.
No.
Let me quickly say, next week at 3 p.m., come back, you all. We will have Carol Hunter with Murder in the Family. This is such a fascinatingly structured book. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but it's quite unique. So you'll want to read about this. And then The Beautiful and the Wild by Peggy Townsend. And as it says on the cover, a gripping edge of your seat Alaska wilderness survival story.
Oh,
I know. The Beautiful and the Wild, and at 3, we will read the front of it. The Murder in the Family by Carol Hunter. 2 fantastic books. Tim, thank you for being here. Thank you all for coming. We love, love, love when you join us at 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. We will see you next week. And remember, till then, it is always safe inside a book. And we'll see you next time.